Hello, my name is Brian Keller. I'm a technical evangelist for Visual Studio, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you the new cloud-based load testing service that we're making available as part of Visual Studio Online. You know, Visual Studio has had performance and load testing capabilities built into it since about 2005. And with those capabilities, you can record a series of interactions that you might use to simulate what happens when your users are accessing your website. And then you can scale that up to simulate what happens when tens or hundreds of thousands of users might be accessing that site or that service concurrently. What we found is that a lot of people need to take advantage of load testing, but one of the challenges for doing so is that historically you have to set up and maintain your own test rig in order to simulate this user traffic. And a test rig is basically a set of virtual machines or physical machines that you use to actually generate these virtual user requests. We thought that was the perfect scenario to take advantage of the elastic scale offered by Windows Azure. So now, for the first time, starting with Visual Studio Online, you'll be able to create those tests as you always have, and you'll be able to run those tests as part of our cloud-backed service. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration showing you how easy it is to get started using load testing with Visual Studio Online. To start with, I'm just going to create a new project. I can decide to create this using either C# or Visual Basic. I'll just use C# here. And this is going to be the project that I'll use to create my web performance and load test. To start with, I need a web performance test. And a web performance test is really just a series of recorded interactions with a web application. Now, if you happen to be testing a back-end web service, you can also use a tool like Fiddler to record the HTTP traffic from, for example, a Windows Phone emulator or an Android simulator, and you can use Fiddler to convert that into a web performance test. For the purposes of this example, I'll just record this very basic interaction with Microsoft.com, and we'll stop recording, and that's going to generate my web performance test for me. Now, typically, you would generate multiple web performance tests, which simulate multiple ways in which your users might work with your application. So maybe one web performance test that shows what happens when a user creates a new account on your application, another one when they're shopping for goods and services on your application, and a final one where they're actually going through the checkout experience. And then from that, you would compose a load test, which composes all of those web performance tests together and defines, for example, that you may have 20% of your users checking out and 80% of your users going through and looking for new items on your site. Before you run your load test, you'll need to connect to your Visual Studio Online account. So open Team Explorer, click on the connection icon, select the team project, and you'll need to specify the name of your Visual Studio Online account. If you don't have a Visual Studio Online account, just go to visualstudio.com and you can sign up for one in a matter of minutes. For this example, we'll just use a very basic example, which is this single web performance test. And what we'll do is create this web load test, add those users to it, and simulate what happens when we have 200 virtual users accessing our web application. So here I am selecting the web performance test. And then finally I can indicate how long I want my test to run. So we'll say that we want it to run for 5 minutes. The only other thing you need to do to take advantage of Visual Studio Online to run your load test is you do need to change your test settings file. So when I double-click the test settings file, you'll notice down here we have this option to run the test using Visual Studio Online, what was formerly known as Team Foundation Service. When I run this load test, it's going to take my web performance test, it's going to upload that to the cloud, it's going to analyze my load test requirements, which basically is to say the number of users that I need to simulate, and it's going to provision the appropriate resources on Visual Studio Online, taking advantage of Windows Azure to really scale that out and generate the traffic requirements that I have. And after a few seconds, you'll start to get the results of your load test. And so here what we can see is that this purple line actually indicates the number of users accessing my site. And what we defined was that we wanted to start with 10 virtual users, and then we'll slowly step our way up to 200 virtual users. And so this is a really helpful way of running your load test because it allows you to see at what threshold your web application starts to have deteriorating service levels. And so you can also take a look at different graphs which show you the throughput, and this really gives you all the information you need at your fingertips to start to understand whether or not your application is meeting the requirements that you expect. So that's just a quick demonstration showing you how easy it is to get started using Visual Studio Online when you need to ensure that your web applications scale to thousands of users.